Hello and welcome to this week's On the Sofa with myself, Johnny, and joining us today is Tom Langhorne, otherwise known as Fandabi Dozi Wilderness. For over 9 years, Tom has been creating wilderness and exploring content on YouTube, and through this he's amassed over 185,000 subscribers and over 12 million views. Okay, nice to meet you. Hi, I'm Johnny.
Nice to meet you.
So, throughout your videos, you do seem to be doing a lot from survival content to discussing Scottish history, whilst also running a Patreon and doing survival training. First of all, thank you very much for joining us because it seems as if you're a busy man. So would you mind taking us through some of these adventures that you're taking part in right now?
So the business ventures, basically, I've been running the channel for 10 years now, but it wasn't until I started the Highlander survival series in 2018 did it get enough kind of followers for me to become self-employed and try and make a living. Now, YouTube itself is difficult to make a living from, but around the channel, as you said, I've got a Patreon page. I teach courses. I make different crafts. I've got a custom ski and do survival knife that I make during the winter and sell. I recently purchased a bit of land that I'm basically turning into a self-sufficient project and kind of reforesting project, a place to film my videos, teach courses, but also learn about self-reliance and basically reforesting Scotland's Caledonian forest, kind of all at the same time. So juggling many things.
Yeah, that's a bit busy. So the majority of your videos, are on survival and exploration through the Scottish Highlands. And has wilderness exploring been something that you've always been interested in, or was it through education? Because I saw that you studied ecology. Did this help, or was it just like a constant gradual build-up of something that you were interested in?
Yeah, it's pretty much a constant gradual build-up. My parents were both very outdoorsy. They love climbing mountains, rock climbing, canoeing, just generally about, love of nature. My mom's really knowledgeable about plants and birds. So I just kind of grew up loving the outdoors. My dad got me into fishing from the age of 3. So I think fishing was the thing that got me captivated because you are spending time outside, but you're also stalking and catching an animal and eating it. So it's the full process of kind of survival ultimately. So I guess fishing was what got me started. And then through my childhood and teenage years, I was just always going out in the woods and lighting fires and making bows and arrows and pretending to be a warrior. And I haven't grown up at all. I'm trying to make a living doing that exact same thing.
I think if I tried that in the middle of Glasgow, I would get in trouble with the whole...
Well, yeah, I grew up just north of Glasgow. I'd say I grew up in Eastern Bartonshire. That kind of countryside. So basically, I was just finding, it wasn't all that wild, but I was basically just finding any sort of little clump of forest I could find. But I spent every school holiday in the Highlands because my parents love it. Spent a lot of time there. And ecology was basically a follow-on from that. I was interested in nature and I wanted to spend time outside. So that's why I studied ecology.
As you just mentioned, you were talking about you're wanting to become self-reliant with nature. Why do you think this is so important just now, especially after COVID and stuff?
I think it's important on multiple levels. What COVID has reminded us is just how fragile our food systems, our economy, our energy systems. They're very complicated. And generally, the more complex something is, the more likely it's going to go wrong, right? You've got too many moving parts. So there's nothing wrong with, complexity and things, but I guess I think is COVID has been a big wake-up call is just like it's also handy to just bring things back to personal self-reliance on a community level. How do you help your neighbors out? What are you gonna do when there's a blackout? What are you gonna do if there's a natural disaster? What are you gonna do if suddenly food prices are skyrocketing? So it's not necessarily prepping, although people call it prepping and stuff like that, but it's just about just taking a step back and the idea of just everyone taking a bit of responsibility for the basics again. And I think on another level, it's just better for the planet because it's too easy to fall into the out of sight, out of mind kind of trap of I don't know where my rubbish goes. Someone else deals with it. I don't know where my sewage goes. Someone else deals with it. Don't know where my energy comes from. That's someone else's problem. And that just has obvious environmental downsides. So I guess I'm not saying I am some sort of perfect eco warrior. I I'm still renting a normal place and I still drive a vehicle and stuff like that. But it's just about trying to take back a bit of responsibility for our basic human needs, I suppose.
I watched your recent video when you talking about how your new place is the in the Highlands. Is this place helping you get to that place of self-reliance with nature?
Hopefully, slowly. I mean, I'm
Hopefully.
still learning. It's
Yeah.
very difficult to be completely self-reliant. What I'm aiming for is basically exploration of ways we can do it, especially in Scotland. I think we're in this interesting. We've got a housing crisis, we've got an energy crisis, but we've also got quite a lot of land in Scotland that is basically mainly owned by estates and things. It used to be more populated before the Highland clearances. And I guess what I'm interested in is like with this project is like, what if everyone was given 5 acres of land? Could people cover some basic needs without disturbing nature too much at the same time? So can people have some shelter, have some electricity, have water, grow a bit of food, manage their waste responsibly, but still allow the butterflies and the deer to move through and for nature to have its space? So I guess, yes, the land is hopefully it's a place to explore that. As I said, it's very difficult to be completely self-reliant.
Yeah.
And it's going to take a long time, but what I'm more interested in is asking the questions and exploring the answers and making videos about it.
Well, when you were in that video, you were talking about the flow principle and how it was helping you set up there. Would you mind talking about that? Because I personally find that quite interesting.
I make videos about lots of things. I'm also quite interested in philosophy, basically Eastern philosophy. So I've always been interested in martial arts. I studied Aikido for many years. I mean, I like lots of martial arts, but Aikido is one of these ones that it's a martial art and a life philosophy. And through that, I've been interested in Zen and Chinese Taoism and things like that. And especially Taoism, that's really where you get the concept of flow or the Tao. So it's ultimately, I've just been interested in it because it's basically a way of living your entire life. Yeah, and through martial arts, you can explore that in a more exciting way because you're fighting and using weapons, but it's also a philosophy for life. But then it's also, yeah, when you look at other things like permaculture and energy efficient homes or self-reliant systems, basically you do see if you're the one responsible for it, it has to be as simple as possible. And if it's you want everything to flow as easily, basically taking the path of least resistance. That's a philosophy of Aikido, philosophy of many martial arts. You're not coming head to head with, you're not trying to fight against stuff. You can flow with it and work with it. So that's it's just a concept, like life philosophy. I've always been interested in, but I'm interested in it for working with the land because you could go into, because basically this bit of land's got a lovely forest. It's full of nature, full of biodiversity. I could go in it like humans have been doing for the past 100 years, where you just or a few hundred years, you go in, you cut down all the forests, you drain the bog, you you put on sheep, or you plow everything up. So basically you just level it and disturb it, and then you turn it into a field. But then you've just killed all that biodiversity. You've killed all that kind of natural complexity that was kind of working in balance. So that's a very aggressive head-to-head kind of attitude. I guess what I'm interested in exploring is like, well, yeah, I want to grow some food. I want to maybe keep some animals. I want to, have some renewable energies. But how can I do that so it's rather than head-to-head, level it, put what I want? It's like flowing with, okay, well, I'll put plants that work with the trees here. I'll put some plants that do well in wet ground, so I don't need to drain the bog. Because lots of these principles, say like pest control, like farmers and gardeners are always trying to get rid of slugs, aphids, things that are going to eat their food. But often if you have high biodiversity and you keep the predators, so you keep the things like the wasps and the frogs eat slugs and things like that. If you have, and ladybirds, they also eat aphids and things. So if you can have high biodiversity, it can help your crops if you can do it well. So I guess that's what I'm interested in exploring. I can't say I'm an expert in it, but that's just that philosophy of flow is just
Yeah.
one word that you can use to help guide you in life, martial arts, self-reliance, kind of everything, I suppose.
I know that was a very good explanation. I was trying to get it myself, and I was like, I'll just let him talk this one through. So, as you mentioned earlier, when you were younger, you loved going into the forest and using bows, and through your videos, you still do the same with the staffs.
Yeah.
Would you mind talking about and fishing, of course, what would you say is your favourite thing to use to hunt and survive with? Because you use a plethora of different weapons and stuff throughout your videos. What would you say is your favourite?
Well, I mean, first of all, in terms of survival aspect, like bow hunting is illegal in Scotland, so I don't hunt with these weapons. I fish with many things, but I guess my favorite, the all-round thing, the thing that I always make videos about, is the staff. You know, a stick. I was introduced to it through Aikido. They use a short staff that kind of comes up to your armpit called a jo, about 4 foot long oak staff. Learn some basic moves of that, and then it's just one of these things. It's just such a useful tool, and you can explore so much with it. I've got multiple videos in it, but you can use it as a walking aid, but especially when you're walking in rough terrain, you're crossing bogs, you're crossing rivers. It's helpful to have a third point of contact ground. Martial arts. There's like stick fighting arts from all around the world. Like go anywhere. There's some from Africa, from mainland Europe, from Scotland, from England, China, Japan. Like there's so many fighting arts just with a stick. So you can just pick up a stick, a broom handle, anything you want, and you can practice any of these and explore any of these arts. You can also use it as a spear. You can use it as a sling. You can attach a sling to it and use it to throw things. So it's basically, I love sticks. Sticks are great.
I was guessing that one. So as I watched your video on the staffs and you're talking about the methodologies, would you mind going into the methodologies of them a bit, of the staff?
Of the styles?
Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
So I like that one.
So that one I explored. I think it's called Staff MMA. It was basically exploring styles that I found interesting. I can't remember how many I did in the video. It was 4 or something. But as I said before, every culture kind of evolved stick fighting methods. Another great thing about a staff is you couldn't really regulate it in different times in history. Swords and things were either too expensive for your average peasant, or they were regulated, as in like a government. Only the warrior class, only the gentry were allowed to have swords, and peasants didn't have anything. So that's, especially in Japan, that's where the jo and stuff, all those fighting arts arose using peasant weapons, because only the samurai class could carry swords. So it's interesting in that sense. I can't remember the styles I did in the video. Aikido, which is the one I started learning. It's a Japanese one. It's very dynamic, using staff in multiple ways. It's very fluid, and it ties into the Aikido life philosophy, which I really like. Also, but when I've got my friend Ben as a martial art expert. He's champion Scottish broadsword and done well in longsword and stuff. So in that video, he was the guy who was fighting, so he was a very good opponent. So I learned a lot from him.
That's a bit unfair. I wouldn't be having that. That's just a bit of unfair competition.
Yeah, I know, a little bit. He took it easy on me in that video. But Aikido, I love it for the fluidity. When I was sparring with him, I noticed that maybe it wasn't the best for exact self-defense, but it's one of these things when you mix styles. French great stick, so that's French baton. That's shown in, I can't remember it's in that video, the author, but the art of fighting with a saber is the book. And that's actually a very effective art, and it's basically spins. You're doing multiple spins and blocks, and you're using a short stick. So that's the French great stick. And then there was Jogo de Pau, which is a Portuguese art. Again, that was developed by farmers, basically peasants defending themselves during civil unrest. And it's basically a big long stick, and it's big, aggressive swings, kind of clearing the space and dominating the space basically. And they use it also as it's still quite a big culture over there, and they use it almost like a dance as well, and competitions and things. And then also, there's different quarterstaffs. So that's quite fit. There's an English quarterstaff. There's a Scottish quarterstaff. Usually you're using a 6 feet to 7 foot big heavy thing. And it's everything's got different styles and different pros and cons. And I guess, and just spinning the staff as well. I love spins because that's a good way to explore this concept of flow, physically and viscerally.
Perfect. So you do seem to use the staff a lot in your series, the 17th Century Survival Kit. Why did you pick this period of Scottish history to focus on?
For a few reasons. I mean,
because it was a busy time for Scotland as a country. So I thought, is it something to do with the Jacobites, or is it to do with...
It was basic. I mean, what initially got me interested in that time period was the use of the plaid, the use of the great kilt. And I was initially interested in it from a practical survival aspect. It's simple. It's just a big bit of cloth, but you can use it for multiple things. You can use it as a waterproof, a sleeping bag, a carrying bag. It's got pockets, it's got everything. So I was mainly interested in that. And then when I started exploring, I think my first ever video on it, I just called it Ancient Highlander, which is wrong. It's not actually ancient, but I just wanted to explore the use of the blade. And then after that, I was like, well, maybe I need to find a time period just so I can kind of thingify it a bit more, find a story. And 17th century seemed to be a nice place because, it's got some of the beginning of the Jacobite rebellions. The first ones were kind of late 17th century. And it was just a time in Scotland that's really interesting because it's still very much in our cultural memory. People still talk about Culloden and Jacobites and the clearances. And 17th century is just on that, just before all this stuff is happening. And it's also, if you just look at Scottish culture then, or Gaelic culture, it was relatively unchanged. There's still elements of the beliefs and the language and stuff that go way back in history. So I guess I was like, I'm interested in all of history, all of Scotland's history, but in order to kind of make videos, it's easier if you can just pick a story to explore, like one story. And the 17th century seemed to be a place that's like, it's still kind of within cultural memory. It's a classic image, someone with a sword and a plaid, and you can explore so much in the past as well. Like there's threads of knowledge that go way back into the Picts and the Celts and Celtic mythology, and just exploring the Gaelic language and stuff like that. So I guess I just picked the 17th century because it was a good story that I could explore a lot through.
Well, I study history at university, so the 17th century in Scotland's always something that always gets missed, I would say, because you're always building up. You go from the wars of independence, which continues, and then all of a sudden you're at the clearances, you're at the late Jacobites, and then it's when everything's moving on. So there does seem to be like a period of. That's why I was asking, because it does feel that there's maybe 200 years there that's just not fully explored. Well, coming from a university standpoint, I would say that's not really entered into enough. I was like 17th, I thought maybe, but it does make sense that you explain it. We here at ScotlandShop are always trying to keep Scottish history and tradition alive. That's what we're doing with the tartans, keeping everything going. That's why I personally loved your video on the Highland bards so much. So could you tell us about the bards and about how the use of oral history was used in the 17th century?
So I mean, the tradition of bards you can see in cultures all around the world. Basically, in Scottish culture and Gaelic culture, it was an oral culture. So that's how knowledge was passed down, and bards were people who were basically entrusted with the knowledge and the culture. Yeah, there were storytellers, there were musicians, there were entertainers. Yeah, they were basically the kind of keepers of knowledge, rather than having a library, rather than having a Google search. If you needed to know something about the past, then you would kind of go talk to your clan bard. And often chieftains would employ bards for entertainment as kind of people to rally and get their troops pumped up, and and kind of record battles and things like that. And it was also, it's interesting, this kind of poetry and music and things like that. It was a massive part of Highland culture, because there was a big hospitality culture. People traveled a lot, rovers and things like that. And it was just in the culture that if you needed a place to sleep, you needed some food, you could just knock on any door. And the general agreement is you leave your weapons outside and you can come in and give them the best seat by the fire, give them a meal and let them sleep. And as a kind of social currency, it's storytelling, it's poetry, it's music, and that's something we've very much lost. Everyone, especially with the pandemic, everyone's stuck inside on their phones, and that kind of ceilidh. When people say a ceilidh, we just think of the dancing, but ceilidh just means a get together. It could just be get together in the house and have a few whiskeys and play some music. That's all a ceilidh is, and that was a massive part of Highland culture. And the bards was I did that video was a collaboration with an American YouTuber and does videos about music. So he came over, and it was basically, he was interested in bards and I was interested in history. So we got together and talked about it.
I do think this is very important, because through my degree in history, it's something that we discuss a lot about whether we should be empiricists or whether there's a few historians now who say that we shouldn't even use oral history. And I'm so actively against this as a thing, because it's just so important in cultures like ours, where just the written culture was given from one perspective. It's such a taken away from the gentry and stuff. So the oral history keeps everything alive, and the biases and stuff is the best bit about it. Is the things that give the meat to the good history. So it's something that we have to argue about every year in class.
Yeah. Very true.
So your love for tartan is extremely evident, especially when you use it in its initial use, which is just survival, and the way you use it to camp. Could you tell us about how tartan was used and how that's changed throughout history? I know you mentioned it a bit before, but could you just tell us about how it's moved on from that to today, when it's like a showpiece almost?
Sure, yeah. I mean, as far as I'm aware, so I've got a video on the plaid. I think it's called the Great Survival Kilt or something. It's titled. And I briefly talk about history. So basically, plaid, the plaid, the Brecine, the Naily, the Feely Moor. It's got many names, but it's just it was a big multifunctional blanket. Roughly 5 meters long, roughly 150 meters wide. Kind of depends. Heavy wool, thickly woven, something around the 16 ounce, maybe heavier. Wool fabric, and it's people disagree about where it eventually evolved from, but you can see it's probably came into popular wearing around 15th century and was around until the kind of 18th century. Probably evolved from. You can see an Irish mantle, which is kind of like a cloak, multifunctional blanket. Right. You see pictures of, basically, it kind of evolved from a cloak. I guess that's the best way to describe it. And then it turned into this, what we see as the classic Highlander plaid. Initially, tartans weren't, as far as I'm aware, tartans weren't really a thing. Basically, a lot of the blankets were plain colored or just simple checkered. Apparently, the word tartana, this comes from the Spanish fine cloth, like a fine piece of cloth. That kind of tartan pattern, that checkered pattern did evolve. And much like everything in human culture, clothing has a practical element, but it also has a big element of just showing off how wealthy you are. So basically, the more complex your pattern is, different colors, if the dye was more expensive, then that's showing off how wealthy you are and things like that. So as far as I'm aware, that's where tartans kind of started to develop, and you could, in a way, tell differences between clans because, different weavers. So you could maybe tell a clan who live very far away from the difference between them from the tartan they're wearing. But as far as I'm aware, there wasn't this kind of clear, kind of almost football shirt thing of the different clans. That was kind of basically after the Highland clearances, the Victorians romanticized a lot of Highland culture. They kind of took the pieces that they liked, wrote stories about it, drew pictures of Highlanders, and kind of romanticized the idea, kind of similar to the noble savage idea of kind of romanticizing and creating an image of Native Americans. You could see that almost what the Victorians were doing with the idea of Highland culture. And now we see basically the plaid. As far as I'm aware, the plaid kind of petered out in use as the tartan was banned after Culloden, and then the practical use. There's a couple of different stories of where we went to the small kilt, the Feely Beg. There's that classic one of the English blacksmith who was too hot with his big thing and created the small kilt. Also, I've heard stories of basically when the British Army was creating Highland regiments, they started to have the plaid as part of the uniform, but then any lowland soldiers that joined that regiment, they hadn't grown up putting on the plaid, so it was just too clumsy, took too long, so then they kind of made the small kilt part of the uniform because you can just wrap it around and buckle it and you're good to go. So that's where we kind of, at least my interpretation, we kind of see the disappearing of the great kilt and into the small kilt. And we kind of see the clan tartans arise in terms of the different patterns, or the very clear cut different patterns anyway.
Wow, thank you.
Would you agree with that? Like, if you work for the ScotlandShop and studied history?
I know. Well, what was the massive? I was researching go down and how afterwards the bagpipes were, banned, and then how they were kept in secret through certain families. Like, was it the McCrimmons and stuff? And then they created their schools, and then how it continued. And I find that part really interesting, how we attempted to keep this culture going, even though it was banned, especially in the Highlands. So so I've seen you wear many different tartans. Do you mind telling me a bit about your family tartan?
Sure. Well, my family tartan is actually Douglas. My second name is Langhorne from my dad's side, and that name is actually borders north of England, Northern Ireland. So that's kind of, it was mixing around. But my mom's side is Douglas, so the clan that was kind of Central Belt. So that's the tartan I wear in terms of my Feely Beg, my small kilt I wear at weddings and stuff. But the ones I wear on the channel, the very first plaid I got was Mackenzie, but that was just because it was the most affordable, pure 100% wool heavyweight fabric I could find on eBay. I just wanted heavy 100% wool because it's the best fabric for being in the outdoors, from getting wet and dealing with the wind and stuff. So that's why my first kilt was the Mackenzie. And then I went and tried out just different checkered patterns. I've been basically just trying to get different sources of people who make it in the UK. And I was interested in it from a camouflage perspective because I'm mainly exploring this lens through survival. And I'd heard different stories of basically Highlanders being very camouflaged with their plaids, and that their tartans were, because they were using plant dyes, and it's like their tartans, their checkered patterns, they were like literally the colors of the landscape. You'll see in the channel, my favorite one is this brown one.
I was sorry to cut you off, but I was going to say, in the video on the Great Plaid, you took that, it was the photo and it said, "Try and find me." And then you had I was looking for ages. You lost it for
nice.
I couldn't find you.
Yeah,
that was really good. I was enjoying that.
Nice, I did a sort of hide and seek thing in that video with different planes and different environments.
Winding all the viewers up.
So I mean, I'm still. It feels like a constant search for the perfect blanket. It's I've got so many plaids at home now, and I've tried them all, and I'll get them wet, and I'll sleep out in them, and I'll go on a hike in them, and I'll see what works. But then it's always a balance between getting the right weight. I've got one that's that green and red one that's in that video. That's very warm. It's very wet and windproof, but it's like very heavy as well. It's not very comfortable to wear. I've got ones that are a bit too light, so they just blow about and they let the wind in. And that brown one that I wore in my expedition, that's so far the best of both I've found. It's actually a bit lighter. It's probably closer to the kind of sort of 13 ounce or something. But it's just got a nice, it's kind of felted, but it's also got a bit of trapped air, thicker weave. I don't know what with a technical name. Or I've forgotten the technical name. So they're not, none of those are tartans, clan tartans. They're just checkered patterns that I was trying to get close to some of the descriptions I read of drovers and stuff. There was a description of, early, I think it's 1723. There was a description of drovers, and it described them wearing brown plaids with white checkers, just a simple brown and white checkered. So that's kind of why I went with that brown one that you see in the expedition video.
Lastly, having a look through all your videos, it feels like you've done a lot of surviving all around on the world. I watched your video when you were back. So apart from Scotland, where's your favourite place that you've explored?
I really like Scandinavia. I really like
for 7 months. I just got back.
Sorry?
I was living in, so it was a nice place to live, so I'm happy to hear that. Great wilderness.
Oh, cool, yeah. No, I really like Finland and Sweden.
Yeah.
I like forests, and they have managed to keep a kind of forest culture alive that's just kind of part of their culture. Same in Norway. Yeah, they just there's something about Scandinavia I really like. And when I did a survival trip there, did a couple nights, it was actually quite easy. I mean, it was during the height of summer, but there was so many edible mushrooms. There was like wild strawberries, wild raspberries, wild blueberries. There was cattail roots, which are quite high in starch. We didn't catch any fish, but it was just like, it was just nice in Scotland because it's so barren now. We've basically just got these big wet deserts. A lot of that moorland is very hard to find enough wild edibles. So I really like Finland and Sweden. I've been to the tropics and stuff, but I don't do well in the heat. I'm definitely a Scottish person.
That's why I found Scandinavia to move to. I was like, keep it cold, keep it icy, and I'm happy.
Exactly.
Okay, that was great. So thank you very much for joining us today. It's been very interesting hearing your stories and your many travels and adventures, and thank you very much.
No worries. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you.